LLMs have become one of the most important technologies to emerge in recent years. Many of the most prominent LLM tools are closed source, which has led to great interest in developing open source tools. Antonio Velasco Fernández is a data scientist, and Jose Pablo Cabeza García is a lead data engineer, both at Elastacloud. In this episode, recorded in 2023, they joined the podcast to talk about LLMs and the importance of community development for LLMs. This episode of Software Engineering Daily is hosted by Jordi Mon Companies. Check the show notes for more information on Jordi's work and where to find him.
Hi, Pablo, Antonio. Welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Hello. Hi, Jordi.
So we are here with Pablo and Antonio because they gave a talk just a couple of weeks ago, a bit more maybe, in Open Source Summit Bilbao, Europe 2023 that took place in Bilbao, Spain. And they talked about LLMs, the ecosystem around LLMs, and how, in particular, open source communities can expand and make the capabilities of such powerful technology more open and potentially better. What are your concerns about the current LLM landscape? You mentioned a few things about certain, maybe the possibility of a monopolistic behavior by some players. Could you describe what the ecosystem looks like right now and what your concerns were about?
I reckon this moment is a key point on the history of development of LLMs. That's because OpenAI has made a very successful marketing stunt, releasing GPT-3, and that's taking sort of the lead in the scene, in the industry right now. However, this development has a lot to thanks to the open source community. There is a risk now that these companies on the lead, a risk of monopoly or even oligopoly with the most powerful developers, as they will claim that these tools are dangerous and therefore they need to be regulated. The problem is they could be dangerous, that's fair, but the issue is the regulation that they are advocating for is a regulation where they hold the power or they hold the already developed tool and they place barrier for new entries or for the open source community to actually be informed about how they work. And I think that's the risk. The risk is where we as the public lose control of what these tools do instead of a risk coming from, well, anybody could create one, which I reckon is a good thing. And it's what is a risk for their business.
Okay, so first of all, were you not impressed by OpenAI? Because you said it was a marketing stunt in a way, and I get it, of course, they probably do marketing really well, but for the layman, for myself, who was not like following AI events closely, I was deeply impressed by LLMs and OpenAI in particular. But were you specialists in LLMs or people that have been following AI technology throughout the years? Were you not so impressed and do you think that this is more a marketing campaign rather than, or were you actually impressed by the release of GPT-3?
I totally was impressed, to be honest. It's incredible. It was a huge leap. What I mean by that is the fact that they decided to go for a public release and make it as broad as possible to the uncommon or to the general public. And that was genius in the sense of making it going from the specialists to the whole world, right? But if you go to what the technology they use is based on encoders, decoders. So it's decoder only at this point. That comes from Attention is All You Need. That was like the milestone paper that created all of this, and that's a few years old. When was it, Pablo? It was 2017 when it was
2017, yeah.
Before we move on to the description of the technology, I know none of us is a lawyer or probably a legal expert, but what is it about the regulation that they are proposing, if it gets applied, proved and then applied, would actually sort of like limit the ability for the open source technology to influence LLM technology development or just actually contribute to it? What is it specifically about what OpenAI and other closed source companies are proposing that would sort of like hinder the open source approach to it?
Yeah, so they have in the past promoted conversations to have the this was in the US, but to have the Congress of the United States to limit who can develop these tools. So basically limit the actors to some pre-approved actors, which will be them and these big companies. So they stop new like startups, small companies, or even like the open source community to participate in these activities. So yeah, it raises a lot the barriers of entry to this kind of tools, like developing new tools and investigation if you actually need to go through all the legal hoops that they want to set up there.
So the foundations of this technology are mostly, as you said, open source, open science, right? Because you mentioned the paper, attention is all you need from 2017. Could you summarize the findings of that paper? And then, if you wish, if you're so kind, describe the encoder-decoder system, maybe move on to transformers. But at a high level, what are those three things?
So at the beginning, what the state of the art was doing, it was an encoder. The way it works is you translate each piece of natural language, you slice that into small pieces that you call tokens, and you assign certain numeric value to each one of them. That way you are starting to create vectors or numerical representations in which an algorithm can manage these words in a way that it understands them. So the attention is all you need paper brought this new way of doing this, which was the encoder-decoder split. And the thing here was not only about translating a one-to-one token from one side to another. For example, when you were doing a translation from one language to the other, you would translate one token to the equivalent in the other language. In this case, what you would be doing is to take into account the whole context of the phrase, paragraph, or even text, which meant that the quality of the answer is much better now, as it will stop misunderstanding some words just as they are, but rather understanding them in the context. And then there is also the decoder zone. Yeah.
So just for the record, point in time, I was not aware of that paper, but I used to work in the language technology industry and specifically in machine translation. And I remember vividly that the encoder-decoder system was actually really popular for machine translation. I would never have imagined that in a sense it would be in the future down the line would be enabling just general LLM, right? Because LLMs can be used for so many things other than machine translation. It's so funny.
Yeah, I think the ecosystem has evolved a lot since then. So there are some. So if you look at the different systems, so you have, as Antonio was saying, the encoder, decoder, decoder only, encoder only. So there are it has evolved since it started. Like there was BERT, and then there is Google did a lot of the work on that branch. But I think the genius from OpenAI was the approach they took with GPT. You have GPT-1, GPT-2 until GPT-3. Yeah, so it's that approach of being decoder only, being much leaner. I mean, Antonio is here, the data scientist, but he can explain much better than me. But I think they simplified a lot the approach and made the approach much leaner, right? With it being decoder only, which allowed them to these leaps.
This episode of Software Engineering Daily is brought to you by Vantage. Do you know what your cloud bill will be for this month? For many companies, cloud costs are the number 2 line item in their budget and the number 1 fastest growing category of spend. Vantage helps you get a handle on your cloud bills with self-serve reports and dashboards built for engineers, finance, and operations teams. With Vantage, you can put costs in the hands of the service owners and managers who generate them, giving them budgets, alerts, anomaly detection, and granular visibility into every dollar. With native billing integrations with dozens of cloud services, including AWS, Azure, GCP, Datadog, Snowflake, and Kubernetes, Vantage is the one FinOps platform to monitor and reduce all your cloud bills. To get started, head to vantage.sh, connect your accounts, and get a free savings estimate as part of a 14-day free trial.
Can you explain the difference between encoder only, maybe the 3 types, encoder, decoder, encoder only, and decoder only, which seems to be the approach?
Encoder only uses, so the encoder and decoder are neural networks, basically. So the encoder is the one that is assigning a numerical value to each of the tokens. encoder-decoder was defined in the attention style unit, which when you had two neural networks back to back. One is creating the numerical translations, the tokens, the vectors, and the other one is interpreting this. And the decoder only is basically the same concept, but instead of using a neural network to create the encodings, what it's using is the hidden state of that decoder as this vector. The hidden state is inside the neural network, the current layer where hidden numerical values, neurons of it. So using that as a new encoding makes it better in the sense of, well, it's flexible instead of something fixated by the output of an output.
This episode of Software Engineering Daily is brought to you by Starburst. Struggling to deliver analytics at the speed your users want without your cost snowballing? For data engineers who battle to build and scale high-quality data pipelines, Starburst Data Lakehouse platform helps you deliver exceptional user experiences at petabyte scale without compromising on performance or cost. Trusted by the teams at Comcast, DoorDash, and MIT, Starburst delivers the adaptability and flexibility a Lakehouse ecosystem promises on an open architecture that supports Apache Iceberg, Delta Lake, and Hootie, so you always maintain ownership of your data. Want to see Starburst in action? Get started today with a free trial at starburst.io/SED.
What about transformers? Because the T stands for transformers, right?
This is transformers. So transformers is what came from this paper. It's this technique of using a back-to-back neural network.
So you also discussed you talked about agents and expert systems and how these might be limitations of LLMs right now. Could you elaborate on that? Did I get that correctly?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, as you said, like in the end, an LLM is an autocomplete system, right? That's what we always said. So it basically, given the training it has, it will give you the answer with the most probability. And it does that very well. So well that we actually cannot, like it actually confuses us and we think it's a person answering rather than a model. But it's only that. So once it is trained, that box is fixed, right? So you would need to either fine tune it, that is adding like layers on top of it, or you need other ways of working with that black box that is now your trained model, right? If you look at GPT, OpenAI and their models, you can see that they have snapshots. So if you go to GPT 3.5, you will see that they have the ID after the model. If you, for example, go to the playground, click on the dropdown, you will see the different snapshots. So those are the different trainings that they have for that model. So to add information to it, there are different approaches. The open source community has taken the LLMs and using papers that were written to work with LLMs before GPT-3. A few of these were before GPT-3, some were after, but the idea is that you take that black box that is an LLM and you find a way to work with it to be able to persist information. So there is the concept of memory, because in the end, LLMs is a black box that takes input and output. It doesn't remember anything. So if you want to keep the LLM remembering, you need to give the information back every time, which in the end, you have what is called the context window. So you end up going over the context. So there are a lot of strategies. One of those is agents. The basic idea of agents, there has been several papers like the React and the MLKL systems. So basically they are systems where you have the LLM being a reasoning machine. So the LLM is the one that is taking actions, making decisions, but actually you have this other system on the side that is called the experts or tools, depending on which framework you're using. But basically this other system is the one that can actually give you extra information, remember information for you, and also interact with the world, right? Because at the moment, LLMs don't have that capability. So if you need to interact with any external system, like let's say, I mean, the usual example that you see in the documentation of LangChain, for example, what's the current population of, I don't know, London, right? So the LLM will make an assumption, I guess, but it doesn't really know the answer for that. So if you put an agent on top of it, what you can do with the agent is you will ask the LLM, how could I answer this information? The LLM will tell you, oh, you need to do a Google search for this. And then you have a tool that is actually the search tool that will go do this Google search and give back the results to the LLM. So the LLM now has that information and can make extra decisions. So this is just a simple example.
Yeah.
As a listener of Software Engineering Daily, you understand the impact of generative AI. On the podcast, we've covered many exciting aspects of Gen AI technologies, as well as the new vulnerabilities and risks they bring. HackerOne's AI red teaming addresses the novel challenges of AI safety and security for businesses launching new AI deployments. Their approach involves stress testing AI models and deployments to make sure they can't be tricked into providing information beyond their intended use, and that security flaws can't be exploited to access confidential data or systems. Within the HackerOne community, over 750 active hackers specialize in prompt hacking and other AI security and safety testing. In a single recent engagement, a team of 18 HackerOne hackers quickly identified 26 valid findings within the initial 24 hours and accumulated over 100 valid findings in the 2-week engagement. HackerOne offers strategic flexibility, rapid deployment, and a hybrid talent strategy. Learn more at hackerone.com/AI. That's HACKERONE.com/AI.
Let's elaborate on this, because my knowledge of LLMs is very limited in general, as you can see. If I ask an LLM, OpenAI's 3.5 or whatever, any GPT model, what's the population of London? Basically, what it's trying to do is guess the next word, right? So it will start with the first word, the first sentence. Let's say that the LLM knows that the answer should start by the population of London is, right? But each one of those words is a guess, provided the question, the prompt, the context window, I guess, although there was none there. I literally started the conversation with one question: what is the population of London? And then this thing will be guessing the probabilities of the next word, the population of London. But so then when it comes to giving the figure, how much can we trust that figure? Because is the LLM knowing that the training data that it's been trained on will be providing, is probably having enough data points of the real population of London so that the LLM can say, okay, among my training data, I've got 8 million as the most probable data point. So I should tell this person that the most probable population number of London is 8 million. Is that how it works?
It is, in a sense. So there are two things at play here. First thing is these models are so massive that when they are trained, it's not with a biased population of data. They are trained with all the data available in the internet, quite literally. So, of course, when you ask something so basic or so common knowledge as the population of London, you can sort of trust the answer without providing any insight into that or any context, as the model has probably been trained in census data or the Wikipedia, etc., etc. Caveat is maybe only the data it was trained, it was up to 2021, so the data is going to be a little bit old, but probably it's going to have the exact answer in its mind since it was trained on that. And as you said, it's just a stochastic model. It's going to be trained to guess the next most potentially correct word. And the most correct word in this case is going to be London population, the actual one, quite probably. This can lead to issues, as it can obviously hallucinate and create information that is not true, just because it's maybe misunderstanding city for another one, or if we get into more complex fields, it can be starting to make up sentences which are the most probable answer, but they are just built from other similar contexts, but not that one. However, in the way the AI agents work is your LLM is no longer having to come up with ideas as in I'm a charlatan in an exam and I don't know what I'm talking about, but rather is at the helm thinking, what do I need to do? I need to Google for it. I Google for it. I get from Google the actual number, and I include that as a context, and then I answer. And I'm answering now having the actual context. So my answer is now 100%, or well, as much as the search engine is going to contain the correct answer.
Yeah, exactly. You then trust Google instead of stochastic parrot. I came across a tweet the other day that said that everything that an LLM produces is a hallucination. Everything. It's just that some hallucinations are true, are right? But all of them are hallucinations. And I thought that was it's kind of true because they are not self-conscious of what, but obviously for questions that are common knowledge like these, they tend to be correct or right because the data set is based on, an assumption on data that is well known.
Yeah, so the other issue with LLMs and answering this question is about trying to go back to the sources, right? So if you try to ask about the population of London and then, and where did you find that number? It won't be able to answer that because in the end, everything is together in the model, in this soup that is a model, so it won't be able to trace back to any sources or anything like that. So, I have seen a lot of people trying to use it for research and things like that, but it's pretty hard to trust their sources. So that's another issue with the LLMs.
Thanks. The example that you've given about agents, I love it, right? It sort of like grounds the potential hallucinations of a LLM, right? In the case of the population of London, it would probably, go out, fetch the information and provide it as context. But I can imagine very easily agents having too much agency, right? Being able to write prompts for an LLM, just keep going on and going on. So has anyone explored this scenario in which they run wild because they've got this, as you said, this agency and this ability to run the task in the real world, right? So the combination of LLMs and so forth might run wild. What are the chances of that happening?
Are you talking about the singularity where it starts improving itself?
Is that the singularity? Did I just capture that? Okay. No, but really, you've mentioned the example of LangChain. Can it run a bit wild? I'm not talking about like life-threatening scenarios, but
I wish it would go so wild that it would just create a Skynet or something like that. But I think we are far from that. So the first thing is, yes, it can be a risk issue since some agents are capable of actually writing prompts for a console. A basic Python agent, for example, is where an LLM will be prompted with a task or a problem, and the LLM would write a piece of code that would solve that problem, and then it would have a tool that allows to execute that piece of code into your machine. And then from the output of that, it will reflect and say, I had this error, so maybe I need to install this library. Well, two things here. Yes, it's a risk issue. It's running code on your machine. It can delete files. It can install malware or anything that could potentially be an issue for your data, etc., etc. But it's not able to do anything that is out of the general knowledge scope, in the sense of all the code that LLMs, GPT, etc., are always providing to the users is code that has been sort of created by humans before, because it needs to have been trained onto something. Maybe it's a combination of a lot of really small problems that humans solved before, and then it's just able to put them together in a clever way. But that's the scope of what it can do. Any developer that uses Copilot or GPT to help in this day-to-day coding, as we do, will tell you that as soon as you get to a complex problem or in the edge of what is already being done or a new technology, it fails to help you, or it just hallucinates and gives you a piece of code that says, this will do. And no, it doesn't. It doesn't, because it failed. It's something that is not common knowledge or not very easily found in the internet. So it's unable to start coding itself until it gets very well. But risk issues, which are not as exciting as the science fiction we would like to have, but they are there. Of course, they have permissions.
It can happen, right? Down the line, let's see.
The first thing I thought was, why doesn't anybody in OpenAI just wrote a prompt that is improve yourself?
Yeah. Exactly. Write the next GPT 5.0, whatever.
Something that I have seen theorized that is going to happen in the near future, and it's going to be an issue for LLMs and for us that are going to try to use LLMs, is that as more content is being generated by LLMs, they will try to use that content to train themselves. And then you start in this feedback loop of basically everything becoming very homogeneous, right? because the same output that they generate, they're using it to train themselves. So I think we will probably see that being an issue, or we will need to deal with that in the future, where we need to actually filter out to increase the quality of the LLMs, because more and more percentage of the content of the world is going to be generated by LLMs.
Yeah,
that internet was that cow, right? I heard something like that.
So we've already represented a bit the closed source, let's call them this, the closed source camp's position, right? They're concerned about potential issues. They proposed regulation. The way in which that regulation is at the minute presented, impede, might add friction layers that you guys think that would stop innovation coming from open source. Can you represent the open source community's take on this? I presume the open source community wants it regulated, but wants AI or LLMs in general to be regulated in a different way. Could you describe that? And also, how do you see personally, or the open source community, see the collaboration between these two camps, right? The open source LLM camp and the closed source or commercial camps.
Yeah, so I think in terms of the open source community, you need to think that there are multiple approaches to it. So if we think about the models themselves, there are private companies that are doing work with open source. So I can think about Mosaic is one that we are closer. So Mosaic it was bought by Databricks a while ago. Basically, they have this hybrid between open source model with commercial license. So you can actually use their model commercially, because one of the issues there are with the open source community right now is that models are either open source or commercial, right? So you cannot do this journey starting from an open source model and then building something with it and deciding, oh, I actually want to make money with this open source project, trying to make money with it, because that's most of the models like Llama 2 have this limitation. So there are companies that are trying to do that. And I think that they are able to do that because they have this flexibility of being able to train their own models. Like MPT models are the ones from Mosaic, but there are others to be able to train their own model, fine-tune their own model, and work with the LLMs themselves. I think that's one of the parts of the working with AI. I think there is another that is all the tools and frameworks that are on top of it, like LangChain, Llama Index, all this. These are frameworks and tools that are built on top of LLMs. And of course, I think the more democratized LLMs are, the more these tools will thrive. Because the problem is that if you build a tool that only works with ChatGPT or OpenAI LLMs, then you are tied to that. So there is a need of building like an open ecosystem of LLMs. So these tools can actually, so you are not tied to a single LLM. So you can actually take your agent, for example, that was built on top of one OpenAI and move it to, I don't know, MPT or Falcon or any of other LLMs that are there. So there are more parts here on the legal side, right? There is about legislating on the data itself. So there is a lot of issues right now with the copyright of the data, the training data, access to it. We are seeing more and more companies closing their data. So data that was open to the public, like Reddit was one of those, right? So Reddit decided a while ago to close their APIs because it was being basically used by a lot of LLMs. So they now have their full control over the data and who can use it for training. And we are seeing that everywhere. So we are seeing more and more silos as a reaction of this. So I think all these are issues that are happening with LLMs and open source community that are making it more close. And it makes harder for open source communities to participate on it.
Yeah, I agree. In fact, this is a really interesting problem, more for lawyers. I've got an interview with Van Limburg, who's an expert on this, but it's a really interesting problem because by definition, and you just explained it before, LLMs create everything new, right? They are guessing the next word. But it's true that they can reproduce, if the training data of a specific use case, of a specific technology, of a specific implementation of anything, if the training data of that is very narrow, let's say that there's just one project out there that has this specific implementation of C++, whatever, it's very likely that the LLM, when asked about that, is going to tell you exactly that, right? That it's going to reproduce in a way. So that on the one hand, then you've got Microsoft and by extension GitHub, that belongs to them, that are saying, we will pay the legal costs of anyone challenging your code or the code that GitHub Copilot has generated that they claim is a reproduction of their code, right? In case it's licensed restrictively. So they are assuming that this will happen, right? If they say, we will protect you with our money and so forth. And then you've got another camp of LLMs that are saying, no, we are only training our LLMs with permissive license. So that code, that training data set that doesn't care about their code being reproduced because it's permissively licensed, which is a bit of a shame. Yeah, and I can see Stack Overflow also reacting to this because they've got, in the software engineering world, they arguably have one of the best data sets of question and answers pairs. So it is a shame that things are getting closed, but I can also see, again, Stack Overflow or the users of Stack Overflow, the community of Stack Overflow, Reddit, whatnot, and others saying, hey, we've put a lot of value into this, a lot of time, and I would not like this to be, not to take a piece of the cake from you. I don't know if you have thoughts on that too, Antonio or Pablo.
Yeah, so that's basically now in the mind of everyone trying to do any project. Like if anyone wants to put a data set out there, the moment you make it public, it's now fodder for training LLMs, right? So you are now having the issue of, okay, how do I control who can use this data? Or as I mentioned, if you ask ChatGPT, where did you get this figure? It won't be able to tell you because that's now lost. So that's the issue, that even if you want others to be able to use that information, the problem is that they won't be able to trace that back to you. So it's...
By the way, AWS's Code Whisperer claims that they can connect, I can't remember the name of the feature they call it, but Code Whisperer is their Copilot, their Cody, whatever, their code assistance for software engineering. They claim that they can know where the snippet came from and the type of license that snippet of the training data set is licensed under. So it's a bit weird, but they claim
that's
they
a good
can
thing. And I think that ties to what we are discussing about what the issue here is. If they do that, they probably have some strategy behind it, right? So sort of, we have trained with only this data set for this precise code, this language. So therefore, when you are getting a suggestion for that language or for that problem, we know where it comes from. I'm talking my mind out. Maybe it's not that strategy, but something similar. Thing is, when we talk about regulations, those are the kind of things that need to be open or regulated under an open license so that we as the public know what we are dealing with. Because it's not the same as a promise that you need to trust as a promise that you can go and actually test or reproduce. The issue is not about whether this is legit for you to defend your value creation or your code. Of course, if that's your time and that's yours, you should be protected against that. The issue is the protection going to mean that only a few companies are going to be able to keep making profit and claim that they are protecting you from their castle or glass castle? Or are those regulations going to ensure that the general public is able to oversee the process or the development of these very powerful tools? We have a public understanding of what they do and how they protect our rights. Because I think the main issue here is not whether they are regulated or not, but whether if this regulation is going to be some common knowledge and they are going to belong to the general open source developers, or whether these LLMs are going to end up being some siloed, hidden in a bunker tool that a few very powerful entities can develop and manage. I myself think that the second scenario leads very much, is a huge risk of accountability. And the first scenario they claim is a risk of security in the sense of, well, anybody could make up information or even go and create harmful things for society. And I think that's more like trying to scare the general public into, oh, wow, Skynet or any evil robot is going to come and harm me and my family, when the actual real risk is who is in control of this powerful tool is going to be in control of the wealth that is going to be created by it. Maybe the public is not even going to be able to hold them accountable. So that's the discussion, and that's what was defended in this open source summit. The main message was they need to be regulated, but they need to be an open, like Creative Commons and all that sort of open regulations that, yes, that belongs to you, but I can see how it works. And yeah.
So you've mentioned already a couple of specific libraries and platforms that the open source community contributed to expand and extend the capabilities of LLMs, LangChain being one of them. I think you also, Pablo, mentioned Llama Index. So what do these things do? LangChain is an agent. You've already explained that, unless you've missed anything or left anything behind. What is Llama Index? Is it another type of library, another type of platform? How does it expand LLMs? Are there more?
So, I mean, there are loads more. But yeah, so
way too many.
Yeah. So,
that's the beauty of open source, right? It's creative chaos. It's
yeah.
You don't know out of where a new project will crop up and just add new capabilities.
Yeah. So LangChain does more than only agents, right? Agents is one of the tools. I think they started as kind of aggregator of all the new like research development to be able to create a framework to do those implementations. Now they are a bit more structured, so they have agents, but they have this. I mean, they're called LangChain because they build chains of the idea is to chain these prompts, right? As if you were having a conversation with LLM, but the idea is this is more programmatic. But they have lots of tools, and in the end, is giving you a framework so you can do this. What I mentioned about implementing this agent or this tool, but it's not tied to a single LLM because you are not using it specifically. So LangChain has connections to different implementations of different LLMs, so you can actually change the backend, let's say. Llama Index is one that we have used a lot because it was one of the first that did an implementation of this approach of using a vector database to be able to build an index on top of an agent, right? To be able to store a lot of information there and then be able to retrieve that information based on how similar it is to what you are trying to ask. So if you think about how an LLM works, an LLM builds this numerical representation, which basically is a vector. So you can actually use vector operations and see, are these two vectors close or are they far? So you can actually find the pieces of text that are closer to one another, and they tend to represent similar meaning. So in that sense, you can now use LLMs and their vector representation, which is the embeddings. You can use these embeddings to search for information. So let's say that you have, I don't know, a Confluence space or a wiki where you are storing all the documentation of your project. You can, let's say that you load it by pages into Llama Index. Llama Index will build the embeddings for all those documents. And now, once you ask a question, let's say, what's the code for this error that I'm having, right? Or what's the solution for this error? It will go try to find the closest pages on your documentation and then use those to feed the LLM. Because as we said, the context of the LLM is quite smaller than all the huge corpus of data that you have. So that's where Llama Index and other similar tools come, that they allow you to do this retrieval of information. Llama Index is one of those. Like, it's one we have worked a lot because it was one of the first. But there are a lot of other tools, like Haystack is another that is quite big.
We have Haystack, we have SkyPilot, we have Psychic, Chat, LLM. There's a lot. And I'm going to be forgetting a lot of them, but any of those tools. And they cover a different area, they cover a different issue, a different problem that eventually you will have to solve if you want to apply one of these powerful tools in the industry. The good thing about the open source community is that you don't have to go and reinvent the wheel. It's already been done. It's very efficient. You are not going to be better than thousands of programmers. So just leverage on that.
So it seems like some things come across really clearly, that context window is a very big limiting factor for LLMs to know state, to have state, right? To have memory and so forth. What about the prompting itself? I think you guys in the talk that you gave insist on test-driven development for prompt engineering. What did you? Did I capture that correctly? And what did you mean by that? What is it about prompting itself, or prompt engineering, or the art of prompting that is limiting? And how do you suggest it could be less limiting?
Yeah. So, well, of course, the prompt is at the end of the day what instruction you give to your LLM, and it affects everything. But that's the thing. These are stochastic models, and as such, the answer is never going to be fixated. It's never going to be the same. You can play with hyperparameters, temperature, and so on, and try to get always the same answer. But there is a lot of things that are outside our control. So the test-driven development of prompts, I think this was the first Reddit from the creators of Promptify. I think it's Promptify. It's another open source library which advocates for that. The idea behind this is you could write a prompt, get a result, and then you are evaluating your answers and thinking, well, this is good. Maybe if I change this word, and then you check the answer again, maybe it's a little bit better, but you are not being rigorous about that. You should, as when you develop any code, you follow a test-driven development because you want your solution to meet a standard quality. So that's what you need to do with prompts as well. You are introducing a stochastic piece on your solution, you need to account for it and make a test, probably an integration test, not only a unit one that checks that it's actually answering and working, but an integration one that checks it's good. And why is that necessary? Well, the prompts are somewhat, as the nature of natural language is something that can change, but there is also prompt drifting. If you have an API, like most of the models that come from OpenAI, they are being retrained behind the scenes, behind this API that's out of your control. So you need to have something in place that accounts for that. Maybe something enters your system, like it changes the context or it changes the fine-tuning that you might be doing. And then that's going to affect the quality of the LLM, the effectiveness of your prompt. Then you have to have in place some check about that. The techniques are very simple, are basically sequence matches or jagged similarity, so on, percentage of words present. But to have in place some sort of nice framework which allows you to see how good are my answers, what's my quality, that should be what gives you a feedback on how good your prompt is being used. And that's the whole point, right? Your development of that prompt, your prompt engineering should be test-driven. And if you want to know good libraries for that, I'm recommending Promptful and Promptify.
I'll finish the conversation with, we're very close to the end, with how to get involved in open source contributions, so you can actually highlight those then. But yeah, so what about context window? Do you reckon, I mean, this is something that the user cannot work on. The LLMs come with it, right? With a certain context window. I believe so. So is this true? And do you reckon that getting a wider, deeper context window will be something that the future technology will bring? Is this a very limiting factor that companies are working on, or projects, LLM projects are working on expanding? Or is it not that important?
Yeah, so, I mean, context windows for more consumer models, you cannot change that, right? So that's basically, you need to fine tune your model, basically retrain it to be able to increase that window. And we have made tests, for example, to take when they released the 8K model and the 4K model that they have with GPT 3.5, we had an application where we were using the 4K model. We decided to increase the window because it will be better for us. I think it was the 8K or 16K. But the thing is that now the results were completely different from the 4K model. So it's basically a different model now. The issue is that because you need to increase the window, that changes the weights that are used in the model. It needs to track more information. It needs to potentially track more information. So it basically changes the way it works. So it's not as simple as increasing on a slider and you now can put more information. You are literally needed to retrain. It's also a computational issue, right? The bigger the window, the more computation resource you need. I mean, we already have seen that there is a lack of GPUs and there is a lack of compute resources due to everyone trying to do things with LLMs. So if you try to increase the window a lot, you're going to run out of GPUs at some point again.
Okay, yeah, that's true. It's funny that, I mean, the most obvious thing is what you just said at the end, like it will increase the demand for compute in the back end, and that I get. It's a physical limitation, but I didn't expect that increasing the bandwidth of the context window from 4K to 16 would actually provide different results instead of just more accurate, right? Or more
it depends
precise.
A lot on your solution, right? So in
Exactly.
Our case, we were looking for an exact piece of information hidden in a text. And if the text is way bigger, you are just making it harder to find the needle in the haystack. So in this case, this specific case, using Llama index to pinpoint to the exact part of the text where the needle is, was easier for then an LLM to just focus on that than trying to leave the LLM to do the whole thing. But that's completely liable to your solution and what you need to do. It's you have the tools, you get your solution. Some people are going to find that better, right? To have more context for a summarization task, for example.
But in the end, thing is, in the end, when an LLM is trying to give you an answer, it's going through the possibility tree, right? So 4K tokens has much less possibilities than 60K tokens. So you have a much broader spectrum of possibilities. So for example, something that works very well when working with an LLM is this chain of thoughts process, where you actually tell the LLM, before answering this question, so for example, let's say that I give a coding task to an LLM and I ask the LLM, how can I do with this code? Actually, if you ask the LLM, but before doing that, think about the steps that you would take to solve this action and then provide the code. This gives you much better result because you are basically limiting the space to give you a code answer, right? So you are basically telling the LLM, okay, first, kind of, if you think about the usual search strategies, instead of you can go deep on the tree or you can go wide, right? So what you are doing by going first deep is that you are limiting the tree and then you have much less possibilities. That's kind of similar to what is happening with this context window, right? By increasing the context a lot, you are diluting the context and you have much more possibilities.
I see. Okay, well, that was brilliant. I will link the talk in which you go through and over and deeper into these topics that we've just touched upon in this interview in the show notes. It's in the Linux Foundation's YouTube channel, so very easy to find anyway. But yeah, you mentioned a few libraries to test your prompts, but in general, how does any individual interested in getting more actively involved in open source LLMs or the LLM community get their hands dirty? What would you suggest? What projects, what communities, what technologies do you suggest one with this mindset, with this intention should do?
I'd recommend starting with LangChain. It's not only an open source library, it's more like a marketplace of ideas where people just go and add new things. And from there, you're probably just going to bump into any other library that you need.
What about you, Pablo? Any other suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, if you go to our talk, one of the links that we have is called Awesome LLM. There is always an awesome GitHub that is basically a list of all the resources, papers that are linked to it. And there are a couple of those. So we have a pair of those. So there you have lots of resources to start. You have papers, you have libraries. So there is a lot of things that you can start. I would say just, as Antonio said, LangChain or any other tool and just start playing with it. And then you will find the space that you think is most interesting to you.
So if anyone has questions about this, can they find you on Twitter, Mastodon, Blue Sky, LinkedIn, anywhere?
I think I'm more present in LinkedIn right now. But yeah, any doubt, any question, I'd be more than happy to.
Yeah, same for me. I'm also LinkedIn, so anyone can reach me out there.
Okay, I'll link those profiles in the show notes too, in the summary of this conversation. Thanks so much. It was a really interesting, it's a fascinating topic, and this was just at the beginning of it. Although this technology or the theory behind it has been, as you said, I mean, the seminal paper came up in 2017, but again, this AI technology, again, the theory of it has been laid out for ages. But anyway, it seems that it's exploding now, so it's a great time to get involved. Thank you both for being in Software Engineering Daily, and I look forward to meeting you again.
All right, Jody, thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.